guys, so a chord is just a group of notes played simultaneously. And a chord voicing refers to the order in which you play those notes, and thus the intervals between the notes. Now I have a number of videos that cover how to play a variety of chord voicings. So in this video, I thought I'd say a few words about when to use the various chord voicings. Now, of course, you can use any chord voicing at any time. There is no rule to say that you can't use voicing X under these circumstances. Ultimately, just do what you think sounds good. If you like a particular chord voicing in a particular style, great, then use it. But nevertheless, certain chord voicings tend to get used under particular circumstances or in particular styles or genres. And in this video, I'll list just some of the more popular ones. So firstly, shell or powell voicings. Now these are chords that only contain 2 or maybe 3 notes. Usually the 3rd and the 7th of the chord, but it could also be, say, the root and the 7th. Now these voicings, because they're so sparse, you're only playing a couple of notes, they work well lower down the piano, and they work well for styles that can be quite busy higher up, like for example, bebop. Or they also work well in ballads. Right, so all I was doing there was playing the root note in the left hand, the 3rd and the 7th in the right hand, and then the melody on top. Cool. Next, 7th chords in just plain tertian harmony, so building up in thirds. They tend not to get used very much in more modern jazz, but they were very widely used in early jazz. And so if you're emulating that style, you could stick to just basic, simple 7th chords. Either using a strumming pattern, or maybe some stride, where you play the root note and then the 7th chord. Next, rootless chord voicings. Now, jazz pianists love rootless chord voicings and they tend to use them all the time, everywhere. But I find they work particularly well in ballads, or they work equally well in bossa novas. And as the name implies, a rootless chord voicing is a chord that is missing the root. Next, open voicings or spread voicings. Now here we take any old chord and then we split up the notes such that the range is greater than an octave. So for example, a C minor 7 in close position could look like this: C, E flat, G, B flat. And we could change this to an open voicing, or again a spread voicing, just by, for example, taking the 3rd and the 5th and moving it up an octave. So we still have all the notes of the chord there, but they're just split up so that they span greater than an octave. Now these voicings also work well for most genres, but they work particularly well for ballads. Next, quartal chord voicings. Now this is where we build up a chord in intervals of fourths rather than thirds. So for example, this could be a D minor 11, right? We've got the root, third, fifth, seventh, and 11th. But notice that all the notes are a fourth away from each other, right? So we've built up the chord using fourths rather than thirds. So quartal voicings sound particularly good and are quite often used in blues. Right, these voicings sound great in the blues because you can get nice, chunky sounding chords out of them. For example, this could be a G7 or a G13. Right, we've got 7, 3, 13, 9, 5, 1. And of course, they sound great in modal jazz, which is where quartal chords originally came from, at least in a jazz context. And if you don't know what modal jazz is or modal harmony is, I have a separate video on that if you're interested. But modal jazz sounds something like this. So those were quartal chords, or more specifically, it's a so what quartal chord, and it's so named because it was used in the song So What, which is what I just played. Cool, and finally, secundal voicings or tone clusters. Now these are chords that are built in seconds rather than thirds, so steps. So for example, this could be a C major 13. Right, so it's built in steps rather than thirds. And we've got the root, third, seventh, ninth, and 13th. Now these voicings, even though they sound a bit sort of busy and cluttered, they actually sound great in ballads. Right, so that's the first couple bars of Someday My Prince Will Come. And while it does sound a little bit dissonant and a little bit busy, it also, at least in my opinion, doesn't sound that bad. You'd expect it to sound much worse given I'm essentially just mashing keys that are next to each other, and we've got a whole bunch of tone and semitone intervals. Next, secundal harmony sounds great in a rag or a boogie. But in this case, these tone clusters aren't so much used to play a chord as to create a bit of an accent or a rhythmic attack. So for example, right, I'm not playing chords, I'm using the tone clusters to create a rhythmic, accented pattern, which actually suits the style quite well. And in fact, if you have a listen to the song Tiger Rag by Jelly Roll Morton, he actually uses tone clusters, sometimes played with his elbow, in the middle of the rag to simulate the roar of a tiger. And finally, secundal harmony is of course used in free jazz in order to sound atonal. Right, and stuff like that. Now, if you don't know what each of these voicings are, I have a separate video on each of them, which you can go and watch. And as I said in the beginning, all voicings can be used in all genres. but for whatever reason, these particular voicings tend to get used more in these particular genres that I listed. But by all means, don't limit yourself to just these genres. Experiment and feel free to use all of them wherever you choose. Cool, and that's it for me. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.